All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kobe Rizik, and I'm the president of the William F. Buckley Jr. Program. Welcome to this Zoom conversation on free expression on college campuses between University of Chicago President Robert Zimmer and Yale Sterling Professor of Social and Natural Science, Nicholas Christakis. We're thrilled to have both of you with us today, and we appreciate your taking time from your very busy schedules to speak about this important issue. Before I introduce our two guests more formally, I want to say a few quick words about the Buckley Program. First, for those of you who don't know, the William F. Buckley Jr. Program is an organization dedicated to promoting intellectual diversity and open political discussion at Yale. We do so in a variety of ways, including hosting lectures, dinner seminars, firing line debates, as well as an annual conference. Our over 300 Buckley Fellows have a wide range of political beliefs, but they all stand united against the formation of a liberal-only echo chamber on campus. By providing Yale students with a forum to engage meaningfully with serious conservative thought, the Buckley Program forwards its mission of a more open and more representative political atmosphere, especially at a university where the mission is the cultivation and creation of new knowledge. Buckley Fellows believe that all perspectives, including those of the right, must be heard and examined in good faith. You can learn more about the program and how to become a fellow on our website, buckleyprogram.com. All Yale undergraduate and graduate students are eligible. So if you're a fellow, please share this opportunity with your peers. The deadline to apply this semester is October 15th. And let me just stop this noise here. Sorry about that. Also, please mark your calendars for next Thursday, October 8th at 4:30 p.m. when we will host a firing line debate on the future of globalism and the American nation between Professor Michael Lind of the University of Texas and Dr. Dalibor Rohac of the American Enterprise Institute. Now on to our esteemed guest this afternoon. Robert J. Zimmer has been president of the University of Chicago since 2006. An advocate of freedom of speech, he has spoken and written in support of free expression and challenging discourse on college campuses. In recognition of this work, in 2017, he was given the Philip Merrill Award for Outstanding Contributions to Liberal Arts Education by the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. President Zimmer earned his A.B. summa cum laude from Brandeis University and his PhD in mathematics from Harvard. He came to the University of Chicago as a faculty member in mathematics in 1977, subsequently serving as chair of the math department, deputy provost, and vice president for research. He served as provost of Brown University from 2002 to 2006, before returning to the University of Chicago to assume the role of president. In addition, he is currently chair of the boards of Argonne National Laboratory, Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory, and the Marine Biological Laboratory. As a mathematician, Zimmer specializes in the field of geometry, particular ergodic theory, Lie groups, and differential geometry. He is a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and has honorary degrees from Tsinghua University and Colby College. Nicholas Christakis, who we also have on, is the Sterling Professor of Social and Natural Science at Yale University. Dr. Christakis began his career at the University of Chicago, where he was appointed as a professor in the Department of Sociology and Medicine. He moved his lab to Harvard in 2001, where he was again appointed as a professor in the Departments of Sociology and Medicine. While at Harvard, he also served as the master of Pforzheimer House in Harvard College. In 2013, he moved his lab to Yale. His work in the fields of network science, biosocial science, and behavior genetics. He directs the Human Nature Lab and is the co-director of the Yale Institute for Network Science. Professor Christakis is the author of several books and over 150 articles. He has a forthcoming book called Apollo's Arrow, The Profound and Enduring Impact of Coronavirus on the Way We Live. And Professor, you said that comes out in about a few weeks, and you can purchase on Amazon, 2 weeks. As far as format this afternoon, I will begin by asking a few questions of my own to President Zimmer and Professor Christakis, and then move into questions from the audience. We will end this event promptly at 5:30 Eastern Time, 4:30 Central Time. If you're in the audience, please take this opportunity to submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. You can submit those anytime, and hopefully I'll get to as many as I can. With that, please join me in warmly welcoming President Robert Zimmer and Professor Nicholas Christakis to the Buckley Program. To begin, I want to ask both of you, I have a few questions of my own written here. In the classroom, how do we reconcile, especially during such a tense cultural moment, how do we reconcile the tension between giving students the freedom to express themselves and alleged offensive content? How can faculty be better models of these ideas? And what role do faculty have in influencing one another to foster a classroom environment where often unvoiced views are still considered acceptable? President Zimmer, I guess you may begin. And
Yeah, okay, sure. So I think this is an important question, and it's particularly important when it comes to the highlighting the role of faculty. Because so much of the tone of the way university feels the nature of the education is carried by the faculty of the university. And I think this point of managing, indeed even modeling, dealing with multiple perspectives, I think it's very important that one keep in mind the kind of intellectual skills that you are trying to see your students develop in a high quality education. And one of them is not every argument points in the same direction. You know, issues are complicated, and different people of perfectly good will can have very different perspectives and have reasonable arguments that point in different directions from each other. And I think the more that faculty can talk about that and demonstrate that and challenge themselves in front of the class. I mean, one of the great things in a liberal arts education that students should get from that education is recognizing assumptions, recognizing their own assumptions, recognizing other people's assumptions, understanding how to challenge them. And for faculty to be able to talk about something and then in turn to reflect on what assumptions lay behind what I just said and see the extent to which students have something to add, to which they themselves may have something critical about what they just said, because there are lots of times, you know, you're thinking about something and you say, well, here's an argument that suggests we think about it this way, and here's an argument that suggests we think about it another way. And I think that's a good thing to be doing. The more one gets active participation from students in doing that, the better, and I think the quality of the education goes up. So I think faculty, just in demonstrating this fluidity around multiple perspectives, can do a great deal. I think it's very important for students to get to the point of not seeing somebody disagreeing with them, even about issues that are very emotional, as meaning that there's something wrong with them. What it means is that they have a different point of view. Now, that said, you know, there are people who are badly behaved around exclusion of one form or another. And, you know, I mean, certainly as a country, we, as with many, have a troublesome history of slavery followed by racism of various sorts, misogyny, homophobia, anti-Semitism, phobia about various waves of immigration, and so on. So there are a lot of difficulties in that history, and one needs to be able to talk about this in an open way. And it doesn't mean everybody's going to have the same angle on it. These are complicated issues. On the other hand, you don't want it being propagated in the classroom. And having people understand, on one hand, one needs to be in an environment of open discourse because it makes everybody's education better. It's what's necessary for a great education. On the other hand, you also want a civil society in which people are not just being gratuitously, personally insulting. And that should be pointed out. Now, sometimes, honestly, people have a hard time seeing that there's a difference between the two. And sometimes there can be blurry boundaries, there's no question. And it can be a little tricky sometimes. But I think the goal should be to have everyone included, and included in what? Included in an education that is the most intellectually challenging, because that is the most empowering and is going to enable students to be educated, graduate, follow some course in their life. And a challenging education is going to help prepare them for dealing with complex issues, a complex society, complex problems in a much, much stronger way. And people need to recognize that this is for the quality of their own education.
I would just, I want to second everything that President Zimmer just said, and I would have said much of the same, but I want to take the opportunity then to just add a couple of little wrinkles, like in the classroom, what could it look like? What could a professor actually do? One thing, of course, is you can introduce these principles in the classroom, especially if you can just say, you could quote J.S. Mill and say, he who knows only his own side of the case knows little of it, and say that even if you disagree with someone, that's how you learn. This is also a principle, incidentally, in martial arts. Why do you bow to your opponent? You bow because you're grateful that you have the opponent. That gives you an opportunity for learning. So taking the other side's argument seriously is crucial for learning, just as Professor Zimmer just said. But there are other tricks that you can do. One of my favorite tricks that I learned from a man I used to teach with, a man by the name of Adam Glick, is you can ask students not whether they agree or disagree with the position, but how much do they agree? So someone might say something provocative, and you might say, well, who agrees? Or someone might even say something that they think everyone would agree with. It doesn't matter whether it's there's consensus or not consensus. You say, who agrees 90%? Who agrees 80%? Who agrees 50%? Who agrees 10%? Who agrees 20%? Who agrees 10%? And then you allow people, you see, to say, well, I kind of agree, but don't agree. And you can see the tension in the classroom go down when people can express partial agreement or partial disagreement with something that someone says. So this is a trick that I use in the classroom oftentimes when I'm trying to teach about things that I think might be difficult. You can do the old law school trick, depending on what you're teaching, where you assign people positions, a debating trick as well. So you might assign someone to argue a position that's the opposite of what they actually believe. This is an incredible intellectual discipline to be able to do this. And I think that can be very productive in the classroom. And the other thing you can do, which I've seen done rarely but effectively, is to you yourself articulate very extreme positions and say, like, I think, famously, I saw a colleague of mine do this. He started the first class in this lecture series, and he goes, I think genocide is terrific. And the students were just appalled, right? How could you possibly say that? But by, first of all, saying this awful thing himself, he kind of made less awful things permissible in the classroom. And second, he put the students on their back heels because now they had to actually advance some arguments about this obviously bad thing, right? And so it forces a discipline even about something that is obviously wrong, right? And for example, my friend would say, well, actually genocide has been a feature of human conquest, for millennia, blah, blah, blah. Hit all these arguments, you see. So it created in the classroom a space for students to disagree. And you never knew, by the way, what this man actually thought, which is another topic. I don't actually think he thought genocide was good. He was trying to cultivate an environment in the classroom where no holds are barred in terms of intellectual conversation. And I want to just second one last thing, which is, I think there's this sloppy conflation between the articulation of an idea and a personal attack. And there's a big difference between those things. So I certainly wouldn't allow the latter in my classroom. But I think ideas are totally fair game.
Thank you again to both.
Totally agree. And I like those tricks.
Aren't they good tricks? I learned them from a teacher.
They're good tricks.
Kind of going along that same vein, I'm curious to hear from both of you about what your theory of change is for academic institutions. How do they adapt to historical and political circumstances? I guess today it's relevant. What should be the interaction between a university administration and national politics more generally? And this specifically for Professor Christakis as well. I think this is especially relevant in light of the pandemic. How have universities changed as a result of past pandemics, and how do you think they'll change as a result of this one? And do you think there will be an impact on the ideas that you two have discussed so far?
Well, if anything, that question contains multitudes. Let me just talk briefly about the last part about COVID and universities and how they might intersect. I think one of the things that is true of the history of pandemic disease is that pandemic disease, you could almost include it in the definition of a pandemic, is that, or an epidemic. So the classic definition of an epidemic is that there's more of the disease than was present in the past. You know, it's a sudden increase in the prevalence of a contagious disease. Although, incidentally, you could speak of the opioid epidemic, and that's not a contagious disease. But it's almost invariably the case that with serious epidemics, you also have an epidemic of lies. And this has been seen for millennia. There's always a temptation to deny the existence of the pathogen or deny what's happening. And we've seen that even in our great country in the last 8 months, where very powerful people, starting with the president, have sought to deny that anything is happening. And here I think the universities and their fundamental commitment to truth and the way in which they stand in opposition to lies is a crucial function that universities might serve in this way. So I think the core values of a university are even more important at a time of epidemic disease, insofar as it's so tempting to all of us to believe falsehoods, reassuring falsehoods when there's a deadly disease about. Going back to your previous part of your question, which was not so COVID related, which is, what is the role of principals in a university? You have no way of knowing this. I've been struggling with this similar philosophical dilemma right now, just in my free time when I think about it, which is, what is the role of principals in general? So you would think the reason the Chicago principles are so important is we formulate these principles when we're calm and not under stress. And then we say, okay, when we're stressed, we are tempted to make bad decisions, but that's why we have principles, right? That's why firemen have particular rules about how you go into a building, and you train and train and train to use those rules even when you're stressed. Or universities have rules about free expression, and when they're stressed, that's when you really test them. And again, that's what's been one of the most admirable things about the University of Chicago. It's not just its articulation of its principles, but it's acting on them, which is the crucial step. But the thing about principles, which is also weird, and this is where I'm struggling, because I think it's really good to live a principled life. I think it's important as a human being to have honor and integrity and to try to honor your principles. But at the same time, life is messy, right? Life is contingent. And you don't want someone that's obstinate either, right? So this balance of, almost it's a political thing between conservatism and liberalism or progressivism, I'm just seeing this in a new light recently, which is, how much should one bend one's principles, and how much should one not, and how does one know? I don't have an answer to that question, but it just happens to be something I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, it is a fascinating tension because I think that principles can be very important They give you a vehicle for thinking through complex issues. And they also provide you a way, if the principles are well conceived, of keeping you focused on what it is you're about. Now, what that can mean is either as a person, as an institution, but basis, if you're, well, let me just say you're president of a university, you've got just an inordinate number of things coming across your desk that need to be decided on. I tell everybody, whatever we're thinking about, we must keep the fundamental principles of what the University of Chicago is about in front of us on every single decision we make. And so that gives at least strives to give a type of meaning and coherence to what it is you're doing, which I think can be a strength. On the other hand, like everything that's constraining, and principles, of course, they're simultaneously liberating and constraining. Everything that's constraining is exactly that, which you can ask, is it too constraining? Does it not give me enough room to think about things in new ways? And that is, that's a question worth asking. But it's not a simple one. It's one of these, what seems to be these inevitable tensions of life, which as you get older, you seem to be discovering more and more of them. And I think these kind of enduring principles that survive the kind of technical changes that you go through and that influence the kind of technical changes are very important. Because when I talk about free expression and open discourse at the university, you go back to the very beginning and it's right there in the minutes of the first faculty meetings. And, this is just what the University of Chicago has always been. And I believe it. I think it's important, but I'm also reflecting a long history and a set of principles that have survived and served the University of Chicago at least well over a long period of time. But some people will ask, well, is it too constraining and so on and so forth? And they're, legitimate question.
It's hard to balance.
Very hard. Balance is very hard.
The other thing, without principles, it's not good, I think, to live an unprincipled life either, or you can't have to have an unprincipled institution. Otherwise, there's no predictability. I think one of the values of having principles is that it's kind of a ballast, right? There's the members of the community have some expectation. It's like a common mission. Like, we kind of know how this decision is going to be taken because we fundamentally understand the core principles.
Yes.
I come back to this importance of the salience of the mission. This is something that we've been pushing for at Yale, is the articulation. Like, I see the mission of a university as the preservation, production, and dissemination of knowledge. Like, period. That's the mission of a university as far as I'm concerned. There are many other worthy missions in society. The advancement of beauty, the advancement of equality, the improvement of the world, like lots and lots of other wonderful things, which I support. The courts have a mission, right, which is the unbiased administration of justice. Every institution has its own missions. But I see that as a central mission. So I think every decision in the university should be taken with that point of view. So anything that constrains the preservation, production, and dissemination of knowledge, I think that should be low on our list in a university setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm constantly, when people sometimes ask me to, universities or colleges sometimes ask me to come talk to them about free expression. And I will often hear from a faculty member, generally speaking quietly, how come we can't get to clarity about this? We argue about it, we go around in circles. University of Chicago seems to have come to clarity about it. How do we get there? I mean, what's the trick in getting to clarity? And I always say, the first thing I say is, when you hand someone a diploma, do you know, what does that mean? Do you know what it means? Just that they were around for 4 years and wrote a bunch of papers and took some math tests? Is that all it means? Or is there something more? What are you certifying? And I say, until you answer that question, it's very hard to have a really good discussion about free expression, because from my point of view, and both Yale and Chicago, of course, are private institutions, so the First Amendment doesn't apply to us. I mean, it just, Congress shall make no laws, and we are not Congress, lo and behold. So the First Amendment does not apply to us. And I keep telling people that the reason this is so important at Chicago is because we have a very clear view of the mission of the university around education and research, and that this environment of intellectual challenge, and the way to get that is through open discourse and free expression, that is the way to fulfill the mission of the university, that these underlying values as to what our diploma means is what leads us to free expression. And I say, if you don't know what your diploma means, it's, you know, then you're in an argument. Some people like it, some people don't. It becomes, you know, one of those arguments, of which there are many. But I think this is about, how do you deliver an education which actually gives people the intellectual skills and habits of mind to think about complex things, think about them well, think about understanding context and arguments. This is what we're trying to do. And if that's not part of what you're trying to do, maybe you've got a different argument. But I completely agree with you that having this sense of mission is exceedingly important.
Thank you to both of you. I wanted to get to another question, and both of you talked about, you know, the importance of how principles almost become more important, or at least discussing principles becomes more important in a time where there's the most uncertainty about what your principles are, and perhaps if they can be upheld in changing circumstances. And one question, I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on the so-called Harper's letter that was released this summer, with over 150 signatories calling for or recognizing illiberal trends in society today, and calling for a recommitment to liberal values, including free speech and free expression. So is this Harper's letter, and of course it received a good deal of criticism. Is it a sign of what you two are saying, that even among such and within such a tense cultural moment, that the notion of free speech and free exchange of ideals is perhaps more important than ever?
Nick, please.
Want me to go first? Well, yeah. I mean, I signed the letter, so I'm not going to argue against it. By the time I was asked to sign it, the writing had already been fixed in stone, and anything written by committee, I would have written it slightly differently if I could have dictated how it was actually written. But by the time I was asked to sign it, I had to accept it as it was, and I was happy and honored to be asked and delighted to sign it. I think the issue is, free expression is also painful and messy, right? Just because you express an idea doesn't mean you can't be criticized for it or denounced even for it. So for me, the thing that seems different to me is the disproportionality. So for example, calling for people to lose their jobs for what they say, especially at a university. We can have an argument about private industry and firms, although there's some unbelievable examples of, a working class man in South Carolina or something that he was electrical lineman that put his hand out the window and had his hands in some way that was misinterpreted as some kind of signal, and then someone ratted him out to his employer, and he was fired, and he hadn't done anything wrong. I mean, it was just a completely innocent situation. But you could, and the firm might say, well, we don't want the bad publicity that goes with having this guy. We don't care if he's being falsely accused. We don't want to bother. It's not worth it to us financially. We'll fire him. I think that's corrosive and wrong. But, I don't work in private industry. I work in universities. To call for people to be fired at universities or museums or other institutions that are devoted to the preservation, production, and dissemination of knowledge is, to me, anathema to the mission of those universities. So it's the disproportionality that is concerned, or newspapers, to call people to be fired at newspapers for their opinions or what they write. This is insane as far as I'm concerned. So for me, the issue that I sense, and I believe it to be different than at any time in my adult life, is the disproportionality. It's one thing to say to someone, you are wrong about this. I disagree with you about this. Or even you're a jerk to have this opinion. It's quite another to whip up a mob or to call for their firing. Because to take a job away from an adult is a very severe sanction. So I also see a lot of people say, well, they just lost their job. They weren't convicted in a criminal court. That is not a joke to become unemployable. And many, many people have been rendered unemployable for basically innocent or within the Overton window expressions. You express some belief that the proper response is to argue against. So I think what the Harper's letter was trying to push back against is not the idea that people shouldn't be held to account for having views that maybe even the majority of other people disagree with, but rather this sense of disproportionality. There's been some recent cases right now. I don't know if people are following, but there's this big brouhaha about this painter Guston, who I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He was a sort of modernist painter who had these paintings, abstract paintings of the Klan, of the Ku Klux Klan, and his entire intent was to criticize the Klan. His family had immigrated, I think, from the Ukraine. I mean, it'd be garbling the biography a little bit. Settled in California. They looked around in the latter part of the 20th century, saw these race problems in our society. He drew these paintings that were criticizing the KKK, and his paintings apparently sell for millions of dollars. And a retrospective was being organized at 4 major museums, including the National Gallery and the Tate and 2 other museums. And for various reasons, it was felt that in this particular moment, showing those paintings was not okay, even though he was being critical of the Klan. And the show was canceled or postponed. I don't think museums should ever cancel the display of art because people object, ever. They can contextualize the art, they can foster protest, they can permit protest on their premises or outside the museum. There are many steps they can take, but when we surrender to a small group that doesn't want something to be shown, I think we are abandoning one of the most crucial virtues of our society. So I think this is what I'm detecting right now in our culture that has me worried, is this disproportionality and this sort of extreme unwillingness to consider what is the intent of what is being said. There was another case, I'll shut up in 1 second, another case over the summer in the Cincinnati Museum or Cleveland, I can't remember which city right now, of an African-American painter who had painted these paintings that were highly critical of police brutality. And some people looked at, and they're hard paintings to look at, and some people were offended by these paintings, and so then they demanded that the museum take down the show. The museum apologized and took down the show, and then the painter and his other ally say, wait a minute, why are you taking down this show? And the museum apologized to them as well. It's ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. You don't have to go to the show if you don't like it, and if you don't want to see anything unpleasant, you wouldn't go to the Holocaust Museum or the Museum of African American History either, and you should. You should go to those museums. So anyway, that's what I think to me, that's what the Harper's letter was pushing against, is this narrowing of acceptable discourse and this disproportionality in the responsive speech?
Well, I didn't, no one asked me to sign the letter, so I hadn't read it until after the fact. And I did not study the letter. I read it very quickly. The whole mindset and kind of shift that Nick is describing is something that I agree is a disturbing trend in our society. I try, I'll be honest, to focus my own attention when I talk about universities or cultural institutions or even high schools. And because that's what I know better. Doesn't come up so much in mathematics, but that's okay. But, you know, I mean, I live in this society like all of us who live in this society. And it's, I find this narrowing, which I think is a very good word, a kind of narrowing of what is permissible in terms of speech and thought. And, you know, I hesitate to think when this starts going into what books are you allowed to have in your library, but it's hard to understand what the difference is. You know, you end up in a very bad place very quickly. So I'm also just concerned about this general sense of demonization of those that you think have the wrong point of view. It's not that you think their point of view is wrong, or I think they're a knucklehead, or I think they're a jerk, but it's this total demonization of them that they are seriously evil.
Yeah, and I think, and it's also possible that they are demons. It's the speed with which people tend to reach that conclusion as well. There's this element of, that's the go-to default, like, which is not necessary. I mean, after talking to the person, you may conclude that they're demons.
Yeah,
but, you know, spend a moment before you come to this conclusion.
Yeah.
President Zimmer, I want to ask our first question and from the audience, and this one is for you, President Zimmer. Under your leadership at Chicago, the university has adopted and pioneered the so-called Chicago principles, which have Professor Christakis brought up earlier, essentially protecting the right to freedom of expression and open political and intellectual discourse on campus. How does Yale measure up with its 74 Woodward report? And what can we do to further shore up our protections for viewpoint diversity in the classroom? And also, I guess I'll just tag on that as many of our attendees probably know, many universities have since adopted the Chicago principles, or at least some form of the Chicago principles, as their own institution stance on free speech. So why have these been so successful? And you know, some may argue that while Yale has on paper a pretty good policy in the Woodward report, that it hasn't always lived up to these principles, and the same could probably be said about many institutions.
Well, I'll just make a few general comments. I'm not going to do a real analysis of Yale because I don't know enough, and it's not really right. I did at one point read the document that was referred to, and it's an impressive document. And what role it plays in Yale today, you know, I have no idea. And what role it should play, that's for people at Yale to decide. And yeah, in terms of other places, I think there are something over 60 places now that have either explicitly signed on specifically to the Chicago principles or crafted some version of their own. And that's, you that's encouraging to see, in the sense that, as president of a major university, you are also representing a university that's part of the fabric of higher education in the United States, as is every higher education institution. And while, of course, your central job is the well-being and eminence and flourishing of the university that you're president of, you also want to see the fabric of higher education be healthy and be doing. So I like seeing, I will say, the universities and colleges think about this seriously. And of course, I particularly like it if they think that the work that we've done is of value to them, and somehow view the principles, Chicago principles, as something that's useful for them.
Professor Christakis, did you have some thoughts?
Well, I read, of course, the Chicago Principles, and I've read the Woodward Report, and the Woodward Report is a very strong document developed at a previous time in Yale's history. My general point, and I talk to other university leaders around the country about, and others about this topic from time to time, it's not just the articulation of the principles that's crucial, although that is a crucial, it is a crucial step, but it's not the final step. It's the defending those principles when they are hard to defend, right? And that's the whole darn problem with these fundamental values. Like, everyone wants an uncorruptible judiciary until the judge rules against you, and then you wish you could bribe him. And everyone wants the defense of free expression until someone says something that you find offensive. This is the point. So you prove your defense, your commitment to the principles, precisely by defending those things to which you object. And so I often ask my colleagues, I said, give me the name of a speaker who you completely disagree with, who's coming to your campus to speak you would defend, because that's the crucial test. So it's the same with these principles. They're crucial. The thing I like about Chicago is that, as far as I can tell, they don't just articulate the principles, they enact them. And that is a crucial second step that unfortunately doesn't take place. We've seen many cases around the country where professors have been asked, lost their jobs, or well, people say, well, they weren't fired, they resigned. It's total specious, statement. At universities that have such protections in place, and it's a failure of the administration to come to their defense. They can come to their defense and they can say, I, as a person, disagree with what this particular professor on my faculty has happened to say about this point, but this is allowed at my institution. That would be wonderful to see more of that, but we don't see much of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, so there are two interesting types of things you sort of referred to, and one is the what faculty members say, and faculty members say a lot of things, and that's good. The fact that is you're likely, and I do get complaints from this one, that one, and not faculty member, but just from the public in general. How can you have a faculty member who says such a thing? And, I tell people exactly this. Person's a faculty member at the university. They can have whatever views they want and express them. That's what it means. And whether I agree or disagree has nothing to do with it whatsoever. I'm not going to tell you whether I agree or disagree, because it doesn't make any difference whatsoever.
It's even better not to say, actually. In fact, that's an even better say, I may or may not disagree with what this person is saying. It's not relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the invited speaker from outside. How can you let this person come? And I say, every faculty member at the University of Chicago can invite who they want to speak. And every registered student organization can invite who they want to speak. And my job is not looking through the list and crossing a bunch of people off. My job is making sure that they are protected to be able to exercise that freedom. And that is a freedom of inquiry of they want to hear so-and-so. And, it's often talked about freedom of expression and freedom of speech. It's a lot about freedom of listening, about who do we want to hear, not because we necessarily agree, but we want to hear what this person has to say.
Yeah, and I mean, I would develop that point that that Robert just said a little bit by further pointing out that one of the key problems with disinvitations, which I don't think, just like museums should never take down a show when anyone objects, universities should never disinvite someone when someone objects. They don't have to invite the person. There's no right to appear on a university campus.
Exactly.
And so, but once invited, it's a crucial principle that people not be disinvited for any reason, period, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I mean, unless they're, let's say, a criminal or bringing a bomb to campus, something like that, but here's the reason. The reason is not because I want to protect the rights of speakers. It's to protect the rights of listeners, right? When you disinvite someone, the people who are harmed are all the other people, not the speaker who loses a fee or an opportunity to speak or whatever. I don't care so much about that. It's the people who have the right to listen to this person, and they may disagree, just as President Zimmer just said. They may want to go to here's an exponent of an argument that I wholly disagree with, that is known to be a good exponent of that argument. I'd like to test my mettle against this person and see what I think about that. That's so important at a university. I mean, I can't emphasize it enough. And the other thing that's happening that's very concerning is a lot of the censorship is taking place not explicitly or formally, but implicitly. So there's a narrowing of what people think it's okay to talk about. There's a narrowing. People don't even bother to invite the speaker that they think might be controversial. That's really corrosive to our institutions. If you're a brand manager, if Nabisco Cookies or something doesn't want to have a particular person be their speaker anymore for whatever reason, that's their business. It's not good for the sale of cookies. But at a university, that's precisely the opposite. We want the broadest possible view, in my view, it's my opinion about the function of universities.
All right, I agree.
So we get this narrowing, it's not good.
I agree.
Thank you. This is a question that was also submitted by an audience member. Universities spend considerable effort in the admissions process in creating classes that are balanced and diversified in terms of gender and race and ethnicity, as well as talents. But to what extent should there also be diversity of views and beliefs that are intentionally fostered and selected for in the admissions process? In creating each class, should there be a conscious effort to avoid asymmetry in political views or intellectual approaches?
It's I understand the appeal of that, but it's a very fraught position for a university to be in, where it's admitting people on the basis of political views. I agree that there's a certain argument for kind of a healthier environment and people with different views, different backgrounds, different experiences, and so on. Creating an environment in which political views are taken into account, I view as fraught. One thing, every time one institutes something where there's some kind of judgment, implicit judgment about the nature of people's speech, either they can't come or, yeah, they fit into some box of people we want on campus. People who advocate for that there's always an implicit belief that it's going to be handled with the same kind of perspective as the proposer has. I mean, the number of times right now we tend to think of political views, okay, we're just in an election season, so tend to think about it as, well, there's liberals and conservative and left and right and Democrats and Republicans. There can be a lot of other political views. And what is the precedent you're setting? And it's a fraud. It's a fraud precedent as far as I'm concerned. I understand and I have some sympathy for the outcome of trying to create a more vibrant discourse, but I worry about the precedent, and let me leave it at that.
I think subjectively, I would agree with you that I know many, I'm left of center politically 100% when I take those quizzes. But I think that it's difficult to be admitted. My subjective opinion is that it's a little bit harder to be admitted to these institutions, or students feel that they're less likely to be admitted if they're transparent about their conservative political beliefs when they apply. So certainly many conservative students tell me they feel compelled to conceal some of that application. I do agree with President Zimmer that it is better for the life of a campus to have a greater diversity of political beliefs. I think that it strengthens everyone's ideas. I think, however, I would agree with him that to go out and to try to engineer a political balance would be ill-advised. And I think that, but I would certainly be concerned if I was a university president if the balance was recapitulated year after year, and I would want to make very sure that my admissions committee was in no way discriminating against the applicants. So I would focus on the process rather than the outcome, and to double check and make sure that there's no evidence whatsoever that, if you have conservative beliefs, you're disadvantaged in our admission process. And if I persuaded myself that that wasn't happening and the outcome happened to be that we had only a minority of conservatives, so be it. But I'll say one more thing before I shut up on this. For the conservative students, I think that a couple of things are important. First of all, having a buddy, having a group of people so you're not solitary is very important. And then I think being brave, cultivating some bravery. I think we're all going to be called upon to be brave at different moments in our lives and at different moments in the history of our nation and in different ways. And, most of the students listening to this, probably only a small fraction have actually had to risk life or limb. So all we're being called upon to be brave about is our ideas. And I think practicing that and cultivating that is really important. So I guess I would say to the minority of conservative students, find some brethren, be open-minded and kind. You don't need to be a jerk. I would say this to anybody. And be brave. Just speak up.
Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to ask one more question here, and then I think it will wrap up our event today. So in the current heated political moment, professors have come increasingly under attack for views at odds with the student body, from the sadly departed Professor Mike Adams at UNC Wilmington, among others. Should faculty job evaluations be insulated from political criticisms, or should politics be a consideration in tenure review or hiring practices, for younger academics?
Well, I certainly don't think political views or political activity should be involved in tenure decisions, which ultimately should be about how well are you doing your job, which is what is the quality of your research and what is the quality of your teaching and what is the trajectory these are on. What you happen to think about this or that political thing is not, I don't think should be considered, and I would view it as a problem if it was considered. I think there's any more than there's a whole load of things about somebody's life that doesn't appear, and how good are they as a researcher and how good are they as an educator. And the tenure situation is about their job, which is that. It's not about a myriad of other things connected to their life that may be very important to them, but it shouldn't be relevant to a tenure review.
I'll second that by saying, similar to the admissions thing, many conservative faculty feel that the cards are stacked against them in terms of promotion and tenure. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is true, it's absolutely wrong. So I would again be focused on process, not outcome. The fundamental thing is, are you a good scholar? What's the quality of your scholarship? That's a teacher. Your political views should play absolutely no role in that, positive or negative. The earlier part of your question had to do with this, a tricky thing right now, and I'm going to try to express it as clearly as I can. I am an equal to my students in terms of being a human being, in terms of my moral worth, in terms of my rights to claim anything from our society or from my institution. But I'm not an equal to the students in terms of my knowledge. Now, I tend to hire people to work in my lab. I try to find students that are brighter than I am or that know things that I don't know, because it enriches my life to have students that can expand my reach, who know how to do stuff that I don't know how to do, or who bring to my laboratory things that I don't know. And I love, all professors love this, the bright, challenging student that raises their hand and says, "But professor," and you're like, wow, that's a smart one. It's a glorious feeling to find students like that. But this does not mean that I abrogate the claims to being a professor. I've spent my entire life learning stuff. And you guys come to places like Yale and Chicago because you want people like me, right? This belief that somehow the students know as much as the professor is very evocative of a particular extreme left-wing point of view, which conflates the equal humanity and merit with this notion that, a young person knows as much as their professor, which is false, okay? I mean, it's just false. And I learn stuff from people who spend their lives studying things that I haven't studied. That's the whole point of scholarship. So there's this sense that in many university campuses right now, which is almost evocative of a kind of form-fruste Maoism, that these professors know nothing. We know the truth about the world. This is not true, okay? You certainly deserve to be in the world. You have your own opinions, but you do not have the knowledge about the topics that I am an expert in. Otherwise, why on earth are you coming to learn from me? You form your own university. So anyway, that was part of the predicate for your question. And I just wanted to push back against this belief, if such as it exists, that, the students know as much as the professors. I don't think that's true.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to provide brief closing comments on everything that we've discussed today before we sign off for the afternoon. Not everything we discussed today, but if you have any closing comments.
Well, I'll just say a little bit, which is that the reason that I am passionate about this issue around free expression, open discourse, and ongoing intellectual challenge is because I'm committed to seeing University of Chicago in particular, but other universities as well, do a great job for the students who are there to be educated. And you do a great job for students, and students do a great job for themselves when you foster an environment of intellectual challenge and students learn from that and develop the intellectual skills and habits of mind to deal with an intellectually challenging environment, because that is what is empowering them for the rest of their life. And they're going to do, taken together, they're going to do all sorts of things, all sorts of points of view, and we want every one of them to be prepared to do it well And we want a research environment for our faculty so that they are free to be as original and powerful in their thought as they can be. And having an environment where there are things you can't say, things you can't ask. You can think them, but you can't talk to anybody about them and test your ideas. That's not the way to get this done. So we want to do a great job in our missions, which are education and research. We don't want to do a lousy job. We want to do a great job for the faculty and the potential power of their ideas, and for students who will graduate, they will become alumni, they will go into the world and do all sorts of things, and we want them to be all set, and we want them to have gotten what power they can from their education that we give them. For both of these reasons, having this environment of ongoing intellectual challenge, which demands free expression, demands open discourse, that's what we're doing it for.
I'll just close by saying I agree with everything that President Zimmer just said, and I'll just say two quick things. One is that I'm devoted to students, and I feel that many of the improvements in our society and in all societies are typically motivated by young people. So I think it's important to listen to them as well. So, you know, I recognize the value of that kind of youthful energy and elan that pushes forward our society. But what I would say is that if the students are right, and if you are right, win the battle of ideas. Go out and fight with ideas, not with censoring or silencing your opponents. Because if you're right, at least I'm an optimist about this process, and I'm an optimist. I do think ultimately good ideas win out, and the truth wins out. And the best way to discover it is to talk about it.
Well, thank you again to both of you for taking the time to join the Buckley program this afternoon. I really appreciate it on behalf of all of our attendees. Thank you, and we hope to have both of you back to the Buckley program at some point in the future. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, and thank you. I enjoyed it, and great to see Professor Christakis, and nice to meet you, and I really enjoyed it, and very much appreciated being invited. So thank you very much.
Thank you.